Come Wasn't that lovely? Well, good evening. Welcome to the best man speech. Peter and I will be working you through this event. I think that's a safe word to use for this little speech. Absolutely great speech from John, true Yorkshireman, very proud. And Chris, actually, I'm incredibly impressed. Having watched Chris write a speech in between doing jobs yesterday, and then lose that, and then write another speech whilst over dinner, I thought that was incredibly impressive. So Chris Longbottom, I mean, what can you say? Entrepreneur, adventurer, craftsman, mechanic, hairdresser. Really the perfect man, with a few exceptions. Today we hope to fully explore the perfections, well, a little bit, and fully explore the exceptions as well. I think that's where we're going to focus a lot of our time. So I'll give you over to Pete for a sec.
Be nice.
Rachel, if we tried telling all the funny stories about Chris, we'd be here a long time. So we thought we'd just concentrate on a few special ones that have kept us smiling over the past few years. And we thought it would be fitting to start with a few early encounters and initial impressions of Chris.
Chris is very much defined by first impressions because they're obviously a big part of people's lives. Most people in this room will have had a meeting with Chris for the first time. Some of them are more funny than others, although I'm very confident that nearly all of them are hilarious. And we got Scott Devlin. There's Scott Devlin in the room.
Hey.
The first time Scott met Chris, Scott and I were friends before Chris and Scott, and Scott had come down to Sheffield to visit me. Me and Chris shared a house for a good few years. Chris was in the front room, wearing only a pair of boxer shorts, preparing to go on a weekend away with the church he was part of at the time. Chris hadn't been very sensible and done his washing with good time. So Scott walked into our front room, not a bedroom, not a bathroom, not a private space at all, and Chris was on his hands and knees with a hairdryer, drying a single pair of boxer shorts on a drying rack. And then proceeded to shake Scott's hand as if it was a perfectly normal first meeting. It's Kerry Ralton. Kerry's here. Kerry and Chris met for the first time just after Chris moved to Sheffield, whilst most of us were away for the summer. Now, interestingly, this is the same time that Rachel was around for the summer, at the same time as Kerry. And one of the occasions where, pardon, Chris. Yes, that's what I gathered. One of the times that Kerry was visiting, Chris had taken it upon himself to build himself an oak desk. Now, a normal person might plan this oak desk building, maybe find a safe place to do it where you're not going to create much mess, maybe outside or in a garage. Chris had decided to do it in our front room. So Kerry arrives at the house. Chris, I mean, to be fair, I don't know if this is part of the story, probably in boxer shorts. With many mantles surrounding him, at least an inch of sawdust and wood shavings, and Kerry was forced to sit on oak beams whilst having a cup of tea. Now this is the very same desk which Chris then put in his small box room that we had at the time, and because the desk was so massive, he couldn't actually fit a bed in the room. He spent the whole year effectively sleeping on a little mattress from some old window seat in his parents' old house on the floor. So that's what you've got to look forward to, really, Rachel, as Chris builds various tables and pieces of furniture. Is Rachel Cox here? Yeah, nice and high, Rachel, just so everyone knows who you are. The first time, actually, admittedly, this isn't the very first time, but it's an early encounter that Rachel had with Chris. We were all in the park, and Chris had walked down to meet us all, and upon greeting Rachel, he took a glance at her legs and said to her, "Those are a bit furry, aren't they?" To which Rachel immediately had to go home and shave her legs. As I say, it's still funnier than others, it's first impression. And then, have we got is Rachel Longbottom here? Is Rachel Longbottom here at all? Oh, right, okay. Rachel's first impression of Chris. Before Chris moved to Sheffield, I had a house party to celebrate my 21st birthday party. Got a page turner here. Chris travelled down from Stirling, where he was studying at the time, and it was the first time he probably met a lot of friends. Rachel's lasting impression of Chris at this party is of him cutting his own hair in the toilet with Andy Ayres. Not for any particular reason, other than it was just that time of year. It was just time for the annual Chris cut hair. Chris later came downstairs and managed to find a roll of white electrical tape, to which he decided to make facial hair with. Praise was put on for the whole party, and to be honest, John Tyrrell was involved as well. I think you were the arbitrator. Anyway, somehow Rachel was wooed by this first encounter. A mystery that we hope to unpack.
So, Luke and I met earlier this week, and we tried to summarise Chris's character into 3 or 4 key themes. And the first thing to note about Chris, it's already been mentioned, but it's that he's completely unaware of social conventions. Chris seems to have got to the age of 25, 20, something like that, without even being aware that social rules exist. Can anyone ever remember Chris being offended? Can anyone ever remember Chris noticing that somebody else was offended? But apparently this characteristic was evident from an early age. Mum reminded me last Sunday that when he was at primary school, Chris had a really good friend called Adam, and the two of them spent every hour of the day together. But suddenly Adam was off the sick. So Mum mentioned this to Chris. She said, "Oh, we haven't seen much of Adam recently." "Oh no, he doesn't like me anymore," said Chris. "Oh, aren't you upset?" "No, I'll just find someone else to play with." And with Chris... Adam, yeah. With this isn't... With Chris, this wasn't some kind of bravado or brinkmanship or stiff upper lip. This was just his pragmatic way of relating to people. Many years later, when I was at university down south, the whole family came down to visit, and there was a grand piano in the chapel. The chapel was very posh and dark, and stained, very, very posh. And there was a grand piano in there, probably a Steinway or something, which I hadn't dared to touch. But Chris didn't have any time for shyness. So he marched up to the piano. There's Chinese tourists everywhere. He opened it up, and he treated the whole chapel to a rendition of one of his latest compositions. I was slightly embarrassed, but I've got to say I was secretly pretty damn proud of that.
One of the situations in which social conventions are probably most important is when you're invited around to maybe a friend or somebody you just met. You go around to their house for dinner. There's a lot of toing and froing with various social conventions that most people find natural. Chris, however, has a long history of this not being the case. So my aim really, Sutcliffe family, is to warn you about a few of these issues. It's particularly interesting to me that you mentioned the yogurt case, because we'll cover that. When Chris and I were about 16, we had a mutual friend in Leeds called Rhys Jones. Around this time, Chris became particularly fussy about spoons. He became absolutely convinced that certain spoons in the spoon drawer possessed a steely aftertaste. As many of you know Chris, if something becomes a deal, it becomes a massive deal for about 2 weeks and then drops off the radar with some more interesting things. Again, be warned, there's a punchline coming that might help you, deal with the issues. So it became a massive deal, to the point that when Chris used to go around to Rhys's house after school and maybe have a yogurt, he would go through the entire spoon drawer, licking the spoons. He would taste each spoon, sometimes suckling on them for a couple of minutes just to make sure. And then if they were a reject, they didn't go, into the washing or anything like that, straight back in the drawer. So my suggestion was going to be that if Chris offers to set the table, maybe, but actually, it sounds like he's already got there. With the yogurt thing, maybe, what? It's already been alluded to, especially from this rowdy table in the corner, that Chris is quite keen on projects, specifically Land Rovers and, well, really anything that's messy, oily and computerised. And actually, I think Chris has had quite a mathematical brain. He thinks things through quite logically, and then considers things in that kind of way. So Chris and I have attempted to kind of put together a mathematical equation which fully describes the brain of Chris Lombard. It took us many hours. Pete actually has a degree from Oxford, and it still took us 4 days. So as you can see, here's some of our working, and what we've managed to do is summarise Chris's attitude. Chris must have a quick look. Chris's attitude into this one simple expression here. Now, for those of you who maybe are not so mathematically gifted, this can basically be summarised as projects plus naively optimistic time estimation equals Chris Lombard. Of this, there are many, many, many examples.